The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, which was already a bad sign. Tuesdays were when the collection notices came, the hydro bill, the property tax arrears, the letter from the bank with the polite language that meant the same thing every time. You have 30 days. Neve had learned to recognize them by the weight. This one was heavier than usual, and it had no return address. And when she held it up to the grey November light coming through the kitchen window of her aunt's house, the house that had felt like hers not in 11 years of sleeping in the narrow room above the garage, she could see the shadow of something thick inside. She set it on the counter next to her coffee and did not open it for 6 minutes. She knew because she watched the microwave clock. She had learned to do that with things that scared her. Name the fear, give it a time limit, then open the envelope. Inside was a cheque, not a bank draft, not a money order. A personal cheque, handwritten, from an account she did not recognize, for an amount she read 3 times because her brain refused to process it on the first 2 passes. $87,000. There was a card with it, no signature, just a printed address in East Vancouver and 4 words, "Come Thursday. Bring the ledger." She almost laughed. Then she almost cried. Then she made herself a second coffee and sat down at the kitchen table where she had spent the better part of 3 years doing the books for her aunt's cleaning company. The same company that had, 14 months ago, been handed over to her cousin Petra, along with the house and the van and everything else when Aunt Ruth died, and which had, in the 10 months since, been run so spectacularly into the ground that Neve now spent most of her evenings untangling Petra's accounting errors. Not because she was paid to, but because she had nowhere else to go, and nothing better to do, and because numbers at least made sense. Numbers did not lie. Numbers did not tell you one thing and mean another. She brought the ledger on Thursday. The address was a building in Strathcona that looked like a converted warehouse from the outside. Iron door, no buzzer, a camera above the frame angled precisely to capture the face of whoever stood at the threshold. Neve stood there for a moment in her good coat, the one that was starting to fray at the left cuff, and looked directly into the camera because she had decided on the bus ride over that she was not going to look like she was afraid, even if she was. The door opened before she knocked. The man inside was not what she had expected, though she had not let herself expect anything specific. He was tall in a way that seemed structural, like a building is tall. Dark coat, dark everything. His hair was going silver at the temples, and he had the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something more severe, like a coastline after a long winter. There was a scar that cut through his left eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline, and he did not try to hide it or explain it, and he looked at her the way people look at columns of numbers, not with feeling but with the intent to understand what they add up to. "Hargrove," he said. Not a greeting, just a statement. His name was Hargrove, and apparently that was all she needed to know. "Neve Cassidy," she said. "You sent me a cheque." "I sent you a cheque," he agreed. "I didn't cash it." Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like recalibration. "Come in." The interior of the building was not what the exterior suggested. It was quiet in the way that expensive things are quiet. The sound absorbed by good materials, by thought, by the sheer density of money built into the walls. There were no visible guns. There were no men standing around looking dangerous. There was an open floor plan with wide windows looking onto a courtyard, a long table covered in paper, and a smell like cedar and old coffee and something underneath that she couldn't name. He gestured to a chair at the table and sat across from her, and she set the ledger down between them and did not move to open it. "You're Marguerite Cassidy's niece," he said. "I'm Marguerite Cassidy's niece who did her books for 3 years without a salary increase," Neve said. "Which means I'm the person who knows that your money moved through her company's accounts in 2019 and the first quarter of 2021, and that whoever was cleaning it was doing a mediocre job." The silence that followed was not comfortable. She had not expected it to be. She had rehearsed this on the bus, what she would say, how she would say it, and she had given herself strict instructions not to qualify it or soften it or apologize for knowing what she knew. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "And you didn't go to the police?" "I didn't have enough to go to the police, and also," she said, "I needed a job." She did not go home that night. Not because anything happened. Nothing happened. Nothing like what she had half prepared herself for. The kind of scenario she had run in her head on the bus and dismissed as dramatic, but been unable to entirely stop imagining. She did not go home because Hargrove put a contract in front of her at 11:30 that night. After 3 hours of what felt less like a job interview and more like a tax audit, in which she was simultaneously the auditor and the one being assessed, and the contract was for a position that did not have a name she recognized, with terms she had to read 4 times and a salary figure that made the check look modest. 12 months, he said. You clean what needs cleaning. You fix what's broken. You don't speak about your work to anyone outside this building. That's not a job description, Neve said. No, he agreed. It's a situation. She looked at the contract. She looked at the number. She thought about the fraying cuff on her coat and the narrow room above the garage and Petra, who had taken everything their aunt left and driven it off a cliff, and who would, in approximately 5 months, lose the house to the bank, and who had already, in a conversation last month that Neve still couldn't fully process, suggested that maybe Neve should consider contributing to the mortgage, since she was living there anyway. She thought about the fact that she was 28 years old and she had nothing. Not nothing as in not enough. Nothing as in the actual mathematical zero, the kind you can't divide. If I find something that implicates you, she said, I'm not going to hide it. Hargrove looked at her with that coastline expression. I know, he said. That's why I hired you. She signed the contract. The first month was a study in controlled discomfort. Hargrove's operation was structured like a corporation with better security and worse HR. There were layers she wasn't given access to and layers she was, and learning to distinguish between the two was its own kind of education. The men who worked for him were professional in a way that she hadn't expected. Not warm, not unkind, just precise. They called her Ms. Cassidy. They did not explain things she hadn't asked about. They left paper on her desk and expected accurate paper in return. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. Numbers were the one language she trusted completely, and the particular dialect of this work, the offshore structures, the layered entities, the movement of capital through businesses that existed on paper and nowhere else, was harder than what she'd done before, but not beyond her. She worked 14-hour days and slept on the narrow couch in the office she'd been given, and went back to Petra's house on weekends to collect her things in gradual increments, box by box, until one Saturday she realized she'd moved everything that mattered without ever formally deciding to leave. She saw Hargrove every morning at 7. He came in before everyone else and left after everyone else, and in between he moved through the building with the quiet economy of a man who had learned long ago not to waste energy on anything that wasn't necessary. He reviewed her work without commenting on it, which she took to mean it was acceptable. When she made an error, once, a misallocated transfer in week 3, that she caught herself at 2 in the morning and corrected before anyone else saw it, she told him about it the next day, straight, without burying it or minimizing it. He looked at her for a moment and said, You're telling me because you think I would have found it anyway. I'm telling you because I found it, she said. And because if I hide things from you, I'm the same as the last person you hired for this, and I'm not. He said nothing. He looked at the corrected figures. He closed the folder and set it aside and did not bring it up again. She did not know what to do with him. That was the honest truth. She had expected something she had a framework for, the kind of danger you could name and plan around. What she got instead was a man who was precise and methodical, and who kept his word exactly as written, and who had a habit, she noticed, of going very still when he was thinking hard, the way some people do when they're listening to music no one else can hear. She did not think about that. She thought about the work. The complication arrived in month 3, which was when complications always arrived, in Neve's experience. Not at the beginning, when you're braced for it. Not at the end, when you've started to believe you might get through. Right in the middle, when you've started to settle, His name was Rowan Fitch, and he was the kind of man who walked into a room as though it owed him something. He was the representative of a partner organization. She gathered this from context, from the way Hargrove's people moved when Fitch came in, that subtle recalibration of posture that meant, this is not our territory, be careful, and he had been coming to the building once a week for longer than Neve had been there. She disliked him immediately, and then distrusted her dislike because she had learned not to trust first impressions, but then she found the variance. It was small. That was the first thing. The kind of small that was designed to look like a rounding error, to live in the space between columns where ordinary scrutiny didn't reach. She found it on a Wednesday in February when she was cross-referencing account statements for a routine quarterly review, and she sat with it for an hour because she wanted to be certain before she was certain. Then she was certain. Someone was skimming, not a lot, enough to be meaningful over time, careful enough to survive a cursory audit, not careful enough to survive her. She did not go to Hargrove immediately. She spent 2 days building the full picture first, the timeline, the amounts, the pattern of movement, because when she brought this, she was not going to bring a suspicion, she was going to bring a case. She was going to bring something that could not be argued with, something that lived in the numbers themselves, irrefutable. On the second night she was working past midnight when she heard the door at the end of the hall. She had not heard Hargrove leave. She had assumed, as she sometimes did, that he was still here. This building was large enough that you could coexist in it without knowing, and she looked up and he was standing in the doorway of her office with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, holding 2 mugs of coffee, and he looked at the papers covering every surface of her desk and then at her face, and he said, "What did you find?" Not a question. "Fitch," she said. Another stillness. Then he came in and set one of the mugs in front of her and sat across the desk, and she walked him through it. All of it, in order, without editorializing, letting the numbers do the work, because that was what the numbers were for. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. The building was very still around them. Outside, rain moved against the windows in the particular way Vancouver rain does in February, sideways, relentless, indifferent. "You're sure?" he said. "I'm always sure when I say I'm sure," she said. He looked at her then in a way she hadn't seen before, and she could not fully name what was in it except that it wasn't the coastline expression, wasn't the careful assessment. It was something else, something that sat behind his eyes and was not about the numbers at all. "Okay," he said. That was all. Just okay. But he did not leave immediately, and neither did she, and they sat with the coffee going cold between them, and for a while neither of them spoke, and it was not an uncomfortable silence, which was itself a strange and disorienting thing to notice. Fitch was handled in the way that such things in this particular world were handled. Neve did not ask for details, and none were offered. What she knew was that he did not come back, and that the accounts were reconciled, and that a week later, Hargrove came to her office at the end of the day and stood in the doorway with the specific posture he had when he was about to say something he had thought through carefully. "You could have used that," he said. "What you found, you could have held it." She looked up from her desk. To do what? Leverage. She thought about that for a moment. She thought about what leverage was, what it meant to hold something over a person. What kind of purse did that? "I don't want leverage," she said. "I want the books to be right." Then, "Why?" "Because wrong books bother me the same way a crooked painting bothers some people," she said. "I don't know how to explain it more than that." Something shifted in his face. Small, like a door opening somewhere in a room she couldn't see. "That's a strange thing to be," he said. "I know," she said. He left. She went back to work, but the door, wherever it was, did not seem to close. Month 5. She had stopped counting the days until the 12 months were up sometime around week 10, which surprised her when she noticed it. She had been counting before that, not eagerly, not the way a prisoner counts, but the way you track a fixed point on the horizon when you're moving through unfamiliar territory. At some point, without choosing to, she had stopped looking for the fixed point. She was in the building on a Saturday in March when she found the photograph. She wasn't snooping. She had come in because she'd left her phone charger, and because she told herself, going to put in a few hours on a filing she wanted to finish before Monday. The photograph was in a folder she'd been given access to, part of an older set of corporate records she was reorganizing. It was a standard document photo, the kind attached to partnership agreements, headshot, formal, name below. The name below was Hargrove, the first name. She had not known his first name until that moment. He had never offered it. She had been calling him Hargrove for 5 months in her head, and sometimes aloud when she had to address him directly, which wasn't often because usually she'd just started talking, and he'd just started listening, and names weren't part of it. She looked at the photograph. Younger, less severe, the scar not the name below it. She closed the folder. She filed it where it belonged. But that evening when he came through the main floor and stopped at her office doorway as he sometimes did and said, "You're still here," she said, without fully planning, "I found the partnership files from 2009. A pause. "And nothing," she said. "I just wanted you to know I know your name." Another pause, longer. He looked at her. She looked back. She did not look away, and she did not say the name aloud, and for a moment the air in the doorway had a weight to it, a specific density, like the moment before a weather system moves in. "Cassidy," he said. "Hargrove," she said, and somehow that was both the beginning of something and the continuation of something that had already been going on for longer than either of them had formally acknowledged. The problem with knowing someone, Neve had learned at various points in her life, was not the knowing. It was what you did with it afterward. She knew things about Hargrove that she had assembled slowly and without intending to. The way you assemble a picture in a dim room, the way he took his coffee, the specific set of his jaw when he was managing something he didn't want to show, the fact that he had a sister in Halifax he hadn't spoken to in 4 years, which she knew because of a letter she'd been asked to forward once and had not read, but had noticed the handwriting on, and because of the way he'd looked at it for 2 seconds before handing it to her with instructions that were just a bit too precise. She knew that he had built this entire structure out of something that had started as necessity and become, through sheer longevity, a life. She knew that he was tired in the way that people are tired when they have been maintaining something enormous for too long and cannot imagine laying it down. She knew because she was a person who paid attention to things she was not supposed to pay attention to, that he sometimes stood at the window of the main floor at the end of the day and looked at the courtyard for a long time, not at anything in particular, just looking, like a man who had forgotten what he was looking for but hadn't stopped looking. She knew these things and she kept them in the same category as everything else she kept, filed, organized, not spoken of unless relevant. The issue was that they were becoming relevant, not in a way she could document, not in a way she could present in columns and rows with a summary at the bottom. In the other kind of way, the kind that lives in the body, in the specific awareness of another person's presence, in the way a room changes when they enter it, which was something she had approximately zero professional framework for handling. She handled it by working harder, which was what she always did when something couldn't be filed. The situation with the Devereux Group was what changed things. Finally, the way things that have been slowly changing are finally changed by one specific event that acts less like a cause and more like a confirmation. The Devereux Group was a Montreal-based organization that had, over the course of 3 months, been making overtures that Hargrove had been declining in the careful and unambiguous way he declined things, not loudly, not emotionally, but with a finality that should have been clear. It had apparently not been clear enough, because on a Thursday evening in April, 2 men she had not seen before came into the building in a way that was not through the front door, and the next 40 minutes were the most frightening of Neve's adult life, and she had had a childhood that set a reasonably high bar for frightening. She was not hurt. No one in the building was hurt. In the end, though the outcome had been close enough that she spent the immediate aftermath sitting against the wall of the stairwell with her knees pulled up and her hands completely steady, which she recognized as the kind of calm that was the opposite of actual calm, the kind that would collapse later. Hargrove found her there. He had a cut above his eye, not the scarred one, the other one, and his coat was gone, and he looked like a man who had recently been required to use his body in ways that bodies are not generally expected to be used. And he crouched down in front of her without saying anything, and looked at her face with a thoroughness that was not the corporate assessment expression at all, that was something much more direct and much less comfortable. "Cassidy," he said. "I'm fine," she said, which was not entirely true, but was not a lie in any way that mattered immediately. "You are," he said, and something about the way he said it suggested that the outcome of the last 40 minutes had involved the active prevention of the alternative, and she understood then, in a way she had known abstractly for months, but had kept in the abstract deliberately, that what she did in this building was not safe, and that the person in front of her was not safe, and that she had, somewhere in the last 5 months, stopped organizing her life around safety as a primary criterion. She did not know when that had happened. She did not know if it was a mistake. He held out a hand to help her up, and she took it, and when she was standing he did not immediately let go, and she did not immediately pull away, and for a moment they were just two people standing in a stairwell after something frightening, with his hand around hers and the sound of the building settling around them. "Your contract," he said finally. "What about it? It ends in 7 months." "I know," she said. "I need you to know," he said carefully, with the particular precision of a man choosing his words like he chooses everything else, deliberately, without waste, that the contract ending is a separate matter from other things. She looked at him. He looked at her. The cut above his eye was still bleeding slowly, and she thought, absurdly, about the first aid kit she'd located on her second day in the building, the one in the supply room on the 3rd floor, because of course she had located it, because of course she had. "I'm going to get the first aid kit," she said. "Cassidy." And then she said, "You can finish that sentence." He looked at her for a long moment. Then something happened to the coastline expression. Not breaking, exactly, more like the weather finally arriving, the system that had been building offshore for months moving in at last. And he said, "Okay." She went and got the first aid kit. When she came back, he was sitting on the stairs, which was something she had never seen him do. Sit on a floor surface, in the stairwell, with his elbows on his knees like an ordinary person. And she sat beside him and opened the kit, and he sat still while she worked, which she had expected, because stillness was something he knew how to do. "You stayed," he said, while she was working. "I said I would. People say a lot of things." She looked at him directly then, close enough to see the exact geography of the scar through his eyebrow. "I don't say things I don't mean," she said. "You know that. It's in the first 3 weeks of my work record." And Hargrove, who had built something enormous out of necessity, and lived in it alone for longer than either of them would have thought sustainable, almost smiled. Not quite. Something close to it. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as a smile, and had maybe been waiting for a reason to move in properly. 7 months, he said. 7 months, she agreed. She finished with the first aid kit and snapped it closed, and they sat in the stairwell a while longer, and the building settled around them, and outside the Vancouver rain did what it always did, which was continue. And Neve thought about the 12 months, and the number that had seemed like everything when she'd first read it, and now seemed like the least interesting thing about the situation she had walked into on a Thursday in November, with a ledger under her arm and nothing left to lose. She did not know what the next 7 months would bring. She did not know what she was becoming in this building, or what he was, or what the thing between them would look like when they finally stopped treating it like something that lived in the margin. But she knew numbers. She knew what it meant when 2 separate accounts, running parallel for months, finally started to converge. She knew what that added up to.